It's September 21st, 2023. This is Roqe. Welcome to episode 287 of Roqe. I'm Jian Ghomeshi. Hello to you from Toronto, from Canada. Salam Tustan Aziz, Durud Bar Shoma. Hope you are doing well wherever you are tuning in from around the world. We are on our ongoing mission to build a new audiovisual encyclopedia of Iranian diaspora identity. Hello, Smart Pegah Ganji, SPG, the brand.
Yes.
I have a mixture of emotions in the last few days and for this show. You want to hear about my mixture of emotions? I have ebullient excitement.
Okay.
And I have dire frustration and anger.
Wow.
Yeah.
Some intense emotions.
Quite a spectrum. It's not even a spectrum. It's just two
polar
extremes.
opposites.
Yes. You ready?
I'm ready.
Which one do you want first?
Bad news first.
No.
Oh,
I'll give you the good.
Why do you ask?
Ebullient excitement.
Okay.
Because the bad news takes longer. Okay. Let me get the good stuff out of the way.
All right.
First of all, my team, Arsenal.
Oh, okay. Should have known.
My team, it's only within a few months, people tuning in to hear news and information and ideas and conversations about the Iranian diaspora will only be hearing about Arsenal. It's slowly, now it's at the top of the show. It's slowly becoming a football, soccer program. My team, Arsenal, got to the Champions League for the first time in a few years, right?
Okay.
We're and played our first game,
Okay.
Like none of the guys on the team know me, but I consider us, I'm part of it.
Team, right?
Yes. Our first game in the Champions League, 4-0 to the Gunners, Arsenal.
Okay. I wasn't sure. Congratulations.
Yes. That's ebullient excitement. I love them so much. They're young guys. They're all like 22, 21 years old, and they're so good. And, for long-suffering Arsenal fans, this is wonderful. The other thing I'm excited about, and perhaps more germane to today's program, is the feature guest on today's program.
Yes.
This is we've titled today's program, The Architect Star from the Khuzestan Desert. Now, you know that Khuzestan is close to my heart.
Yes, I do.
Why is that?
Because you are also from Khuzestan.
My father, that's correct. Now, this person and her sister, skill testing question.
Uh-oh.
This person and her sister, I'm asking you as if you don't know who the guest is coming on the show. It would have been better if it was like that. There's a podcast called Smartless.
Yes.
And they surprise each other with who the guest is.
Yes.
Then I could have done this right now.
That would have
I could have
cool.
said, this person and her sister, who have become world-renowned architects based in New York with a company founded by them, two women who founded this company, 3 or 4 decades ago, pioneers in the architecture industry, captains of modernism and really, influencers in terms of the architecture they have done around the world, including in Iran now. They grew up in Khuzestan, and more specifically in the desert.
Yes.
They grew up in the desert, and her inspiration, our guest today, who you can guess.
I'm ready to answer.
Yes. Our guest today got her inspiration to become a world-renowned architect whilst being in the desert in Khuzestan as a kid. This is back to the pre-Islamic Revolution, so back to the 70s, 60s, and 70s, I guess.
Right.
Gisue Hariri.
Oh, I was going to do the whole
go
is
ahead.
Gisue Hariri,
wow.
Jeopardy style.
Oh, you have to say it like Jeopardy.
Yeah. But there you
now
go.
we have to explain what Jeopardy is. Hariri and Hariri is Gisue and her sister. That's the name of the company that has become this acclaimed global. Yeah. But Gisue Hariri joins me for a feature interview from New York about her life, about how it all happened, and about her perspectives on what's going on in the world these days, including, of course, the uprising in Iran. So very excited to have her on the show. Ebullient excitement, Pegah, SPG.
Yes.
That's the first. Now we get to the dire frustration and anger.
The polar opposite.
Travel to the other extreme.
Yes.
I made first of all, I think we got to be real. It's been a shitty week for those who want democracy and freedom in Iran. And I think that people either are so exhausted or have turned their attentions elsewhere, notwithstanding the 1-year anniversary that happened this past weekend, et cetera, of the killing of Mahsa Amini. But there just isn't the attention, I believe, certainly not globally, but even in the Iranian diaspora, on what's going on. Otherwise, I think more people would have to come to terms with and speak out about just how shitty a week it's been. Because it just feels like there's a number of things that have happened that are not positive in terms of the movement for freedom and democracy in Iran, women, life, freedom, etc., and things that I don't think would have even been allowed in terms of the tolerance of the global Iranian community. You know, the outcry would have been so great if these things had happened 6 months ago. So first of all, Raisi and his entourage, the Iranian president and the head of the regime and a bunch of these mullah guys, are running around New York giving interviews, doing, speeches, meetings, whatever. And from what I understand, have been given special dispensation to come to New York. In other words, there are these so-called, rules that we don't allow, that this is like the IRGC terrorist list and all of that the U.S. has. That Anthony Blinken, I read this, I don't know if this, it's got to be correct on some level because they've come to New York, has actually given dispensation for these guys to come and travel to New York and do their speeches and attend the United Nations and all that. So you got that. You got $6 billion as part of this U.S. deal, the hostage thing. I know you're going to talk about that as part of the roundup in a few moments, but there's that the Islamic Republic regime has just put in its pocket, $6 billion as a product of the U.S. administration saying, okay, let's make this deal or whatever. And of course, this is supposed to be earmarked for humanitarian purposes. Ha, 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 ha.
Hilarious.
And then they're laughing all the way to the non-humanitarian spending. A new, extremely aggressive and what would you say?
Disgusting.
Hijab law. No, I'm talking about the new hijab law that's like extremely, it's this sort of next level crackdown on freedom of people and women in Iran, etc. So all of these things are happening that lead to a pretty negative week in terms of the accumulation of stuff. Hey, you win some weeks, you lose some weeks in the battle towards the revolution, whatever. But one of the things that we've talked about, I want to cast you back to last week where we had a special edition of Roqe that was the 1-year anniversary of the uprising.
Yes.
And we brought on 13 people from different fields of Iranian background in different parts of the world. Prominent folks that we love, folks that we know are eloquent, passionate, care a lot about the issue, have talked about it, have been very involved. Everyone from a doctor like Dr. K to a famous iconic musician like Farmaz Aslani to an academic and a women's rights activist like Furuq Kanani. All of these people came on the show, right? And all of them, when asked the question, I sound like I'm blaming them. I'm just saying, all of them, when asked the question, what do we need to do? What lesson have we learned from the last year of the uprising? They all said what?
Unity.
Yes, they all said
need.
we what we've learned is we are more powerful when we're together and we're unified. Yes. And I feel like that has become, I almost commend those I do commend those actually for their courage, even if I disagree with them, who would say, we don't need unity. Fuck that. Let's be disunified. Let's not get along. It feels like this is the thing that everybody says, at least most people. Unity, let's work together. Come on, it's our time, And particularly we're talking now about the diaspora. We're talking about Iranians outside of Iran, how we can support those inside Iran, because they're the ones leading this thing. They're the ones who matter. They're the ones who will ultimately need self-determination to decide where Iran goes. Not us, them. We support them. Yes. How do we support them effectively, especially in a shitty week like this? We are unified, right? Okay.
But are we?
So I made a video this afternoon. We put it up on Instagram.
Yes.
Can we make unity happen in the Iranian diaspora? Now, it's an open question because you mosey over to social media and people are yelling at each other or, canceling each other or sort of unfollowing, but Also, here in Toronto, I was waiting 5 days to talk about this. We had on Saturday there was demonstrations planned around the world to mark a global day of action to show support for freedom and unity and freedom and democracy in Iran on the anniversary of the killing of Mahsa Amini. Right?
That's right.
This past Saturday, September 16th. And what did we have in Toronto? Obviously, we've got a huge Iranian expat, people of Iranian descent population that's grown here. We've seen so much activism. It's been so inspiring. So we knew there was going to be a big demonstration. A lot of people were involved. So what did we have? We had demonstrations. Not just demonstrations.
Yes.
More than one. At least two big ones. And actually there were more, but there were two big ones.
That's right.
Now, why were there two big ones, one may ask?
I wish I knew.
Well, you do know.
I do, but this is the thing. Every time we talk about unity, it's like this double-edged sword to me, because yes, we all talk about it, but then in reality and in actuality and in action, you have a city like Toronto where these organizers, and listen, good on them for organizing it. Don't get me wrong. I'm all for these demonstrations and the rallies and people coming out, and I think it's important, super important. It's imperative for what we're trying to do. But for God's sakes, at least put it at different times, and why divide people?
Well, they were sort of at different times. They were.
Okay, but not really, because if you were downtown, how are you, or if you were uptown, how are you going to get downtown in
First
time?
of all, let me answer the hypothetical question that wasn't really a hypothetical. Why were there two or more demonstrations? Because people of Iranian descent who want to be active about this seem to be disagreeing ideologically, politically, tactically, in terms of where their allegiances lie with so-called opposition leaders, etc. So they can't get along to have one big demonstration. And let me reiterate very clearly, now for anybody listening, that I am not blaming the organizers of these rallies for organizing demonstrations. It's a tough thing to do. Anytime anyone who's organized a demonstration, it's hard work. Nobody's getting paid. Nobody's getting patted on the back for this. They're doing this stuff. They're trying to bring together people. They're trying to make a difference. And nor do we blame the people going to these rallies and demonstrations and trying to be active and all of that. But for God's sake, can we, on that 1 year anniversary of Mahsa Amini, when everyone is saying unity is what we need, that's what we've learned, togetherness, let's do this. We're fighting this formidable foe. We do it by coming together, with common goal, free Iran. Can we not just have one rally, one demonstration? And the thing that triggered it for me was, and I mentioned this on that video that I made, I got a message from a Canadian journalist who works with a TV network. Here's what we want. Right? Yeah. We want these things to be covered by media that's non-Iranian media. We want, there's a demonstration for what? About Iran. Oh, why? Okay, here's the information. That's good. That's, we know that the West isn't going to save Iran and it's up to Iranians, and we know that the media is whatever. But hey, we'll take the coverage where we can. Somebody's interested in covering, has heard that there's Iranian demonstrations of people of Iranian descent and others in support of the people inside Iran today in Toronto. Okay, so, and she reaches out to me and says, hey, I heard there's two demonstrations. Which one do I go to? Yeah. So then I am in the position. I actually did say, well, try and go to everything, right? Yeah. And she was like, look, I don't have the time to run around the city to go to all different demonstrations. What are you guys doing? What do you? So then I'm in the position to have to tell this journalist, this reporter, which demonstration to go to, when I know that there's people with good intentions on both of them and whatever. And and just in that moment, I was kind of like, well, why?
Why are you in that position?
Why does this journalist have to choose? Can't we on this day? Like, we need different opinions. We need people passionately debating. We need different leaders, different whatever.
Absolutely,
all of that is good. But in the moment when we're trying to, make a difference and send a message out and talk about this regime and Raisi's in New York, we have to have 10 different demonstrations because people all get along with each other.
It's so funny because I didn't know that story.
Should I go back to Arsenal?
No.
All right. I was feeling so much better when I said, go ahead.
I didn't know that, this had happened, that a reporter had reached out to and whatnot. So when I heard this, I was so sad because, again, it took me back to the fact that, I've had this emotion, this same anger, if you will, about why it is that we can't seem to get it together with the unity. But when I heard that, and I don't know, maybe it's because it was quote unquote Western coverage, or it's because we want the coverage and things like that, it made me so upset to think that not only are we dealing with this internally, you know, as Iranians across the globe, we have these conversations, but it's also spreading to, you know, individuals who are trying to understand this, and it's causing a blockade. It's not. We
know all the issues, and we even know that some of the divisions are legitimate and all of that, right? But imagine, I mean, I don't know a lot about, you know, I don't know intimately what's happening in China, right? So I hear there's this demonstration against the regime in China, and a bunch of people of Chinese descent are going to have a day of action around the world. And then I hear there's 2 different demonstrations of Chinese people, and I have to call someone and go, which Chinese demonstration am I going to? And they go, well, our community's divided, we're not sure. I mean, what messages? And I'm like, well, you know, who do I trust? What do I know? What are they? You know, so what's the? I mean, it's confusing, right? It's confusing to those, certainly to those who aren't schooled in all that's going on with Iran and all the intricacies of the opposition that's grown over different years of different people, and who, again, legitimately, some folks say, hey, you know, this is my folks, these people have been at it for years, these guys are, you know, whatever, right? No, a lot of Western folks don't know those intricacies, even if they're journalists who want to read up on things and everything. So all they know is, oh, there's some murky thing going on in the Iranian community where there's a bunch of people saying different things, and we're not sure, and they're arguing with each other, and it's just not it's not helpful.
Not at all.
I don't think.
No, I agree.
Now my question is, legitimately, if you're out there and you think the fact that we're not unified, like the fact that, in this case at least, the fact that we should have 2 or 3 different demonstrations that have different ideological messages and stuff, if you think that's a good thing, I want to hear from you. Like, tell me why maybe it's positive in some people's eyes. Maybe it's helpful to have different things happening in the city with different people
at the same time. I'm sorry, my stance on this is very clear. So
even Iranian friends were confused, right?
Yes.
A lot of Iranians were like, when is it? Where am I supposed to go?
Yeah, I mean, there were so many people I talked to, and I was saying, you know, well, I'll see you Saturday at Queen's Park. And then they were like, Queen's Park? I thought it was Mel Lastman. And then someone else was like, no, I thought it was somewhere else. I mean, even amongst ourselves, having known the history of all these intricacies.
And I wonder if they're, again, you guys, we don't want to be so Toronto-centric, because our Toronto audience is 10% of our show. There's people listening around the world. If you guys have these same issues in Sydney, Australia, or in London, tell me, or in San Diego. I mean, maybe this is not unique to Toronto, but we have such a big community here, such a powerful community with such amazing people. It's just a shame to me. I mean, listen, it's always been this way. We always know. You go back in the Green Movement in 2009, I was on stage, you know, and I would look out, and there's like the communists and the socialists and the monarchists and everybody's here.
That part I'm okay with. I think that's a good thing.
Of course.
I just don't think
we have a bunch of different groups, but, you know, everybody at that point was pretty much on the same page, you know, for supporting the Green Movement. Now, of course, we've traveled a long way since then. And I think everyone's on the same page here about wanting to get rid of the regime in Iran. Like, at least those who decide to go on these demonstrations of one kind or another. But so I guess one theory would be, let's all come together for now, and then, you know, negotiate the differences after, right? That's But, you know, Arsenal.
Let's go
back in the Champions League.
The Gunners, is that what you called them?
The Gunners.
Okay, I'll remember that.
Well, you know,
time.
Arsenal is like a gun, you know, an arsenal of equipment, like a cannon, right?
Yes.
So the nickname of the Arsenal
the Gunners
team and fans has been the Gunners,
Okay. Which
then becomes, the slang of that is the Gooners.
Oh, okay.
So if you're really on the inside, you're like, hey, Goona, you know, like that, you'll know more about Arsenal than you will about the Iranian diaspora by the end of this year. Gisue Hariri is coming up. Before we do that, I was going to say a couple more things, but let's go to the Roqe Roundup, since we're already involved in this. Talk a bit about what's been happening this past week, and then we'll go to our featured guest, who I'm very much looking forward to having. She is awaiting us in New York. I mentioned, whoops, that was my computer. Sorry. I mentioned Raisi being given a platform, like coming to New York, making his triumphant entrance to New York. There's a number of things around this. Like, let's talk about it.
I mean, I think giving him a platform is such an understatement with what we've seen happen. I mean, he spoke for 36 minutes at the UN General Assembly. That's the first thing. We've talked.
Is that a lot? I don't know.
Listen, I think 3 seconds for someone like Raisi is a lot. So to me, yes. He's had numerous private meetings behind closed doors who we don't know with who. We just know that there were political figures, analysts, reporters given all sorts of invitations. We know that there was a New York-based think tank, the Council on Foreign Relations, CFR for short, who sent out this elaborate invitation and put him on a panel, and through the pressure of Iranians, actually they ended up canceling it and then rescheduling it, and there's been all sorts of controversy with that. So to say that he's been given a platform, again, I think is such an understatement for an individual like him. There's been so many opportunities that he's had to spread more lies and to
now, and for anyone listening, maybe somebody who's a non-Iranian, who's a newcomer to what we were saying, well, he's the president of Iran. Why shouldn't he be able to come to New York and give a speech? The answer is,
well, because like we've talked about for months on end, the Islamic Republic and Iran and Iranians are two completely separate things. The Islamic Republic does not stand for anything that Iranians are trying to achieve, and it's this constant battle against a theocratic regime.
And by rolling out the metaphorical red carpet for Raisi and his circle to come to New York and speak at the United Nations, you basically justify the existence of this regime and what they do, and say, well, every country has problems, and we're talking about a government that for most Iranians around the world, I think it's fair to say, at least those outside of Iran, and many inside Iran, obviously, has long ago crossed the line of any legitimacy in terms of its iron-fisted actions that are neither democratic nor justified, and the result has been children and young women and many others incarcerated and tortured and killed and all of those things. And so, again, the sad part for me, part of it was, that in the height of the, so far the height of the uprising, I don't think it's over. It has its ebbs and flows, but go back to November of last year. There was no way that the American administration and others would allow Raisi to traipse around New York. It would have been a very bad tactical move and bad PR, no matter what your intentions are anyway. But things have shifted.
And it's also the hypocrisy, right? That's also what I have a problem with. And I know we've talked about this for the last year, if not longer. But on one hand, you have someone like Biden come out and say, we don't agree with what the Islamic Republic is doing, and we condemn this and that. And, we stand against human rights violations and all sorts of things. But then you hand them a carte blanche and allow them to come into a city like New York, to come to the UN, to give them $6 billion and to release hostages and all these other things that we've seen. So it's the hypocrisy more than anything else that's infuriating.
Look, it's really heartening to see some of those American hostages released. Those are heartening moments and images, and thank God for them and their families. But it was also interesting to see how many Iranian-American, even some media types and stuff were coming out going, oh, this is the right thing to do. That $6 billion is ultimately Iranians' money. Like this kind of narrative that, again, wouldn't have passed the muster a few months back. You kidding me? You're going to give $6 billion for these guys to use however they want, But now it seems like, for now, things have... Look, a lot of headway has been made. So some of this may be 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, 3 steps forward, 2 steps back. It's like a little dance that's happening on the way to the Garden of Eden. But this is this was frustrating.
It was. But can we go back to the hostage diplomacy for a second? Because like many things, I have a very strong opinion about this.
Not new.
Yeah.
The idea of we
Not
take
new at all.
hostage and then we have demands and this is done, internationally. And
And don't get me wrong. If I put myself in the position of those families for even 1 second, maybe all of these arguments that I'm about to make would go out the window. And I completely understand that. But putting the emotional aspect of it aside and looking at it as exactly that, a method of diplomacy, I don't agree with it at all, because I think it just incentivizes hostage taking, especially when you're dealing with a regime like the Islamic Republic. I mean, look at this. They've taken more than 5, but the 5 that have been released, let's talk about them. They've taken them knowing that the United States is going to cave and give them $6 billion. Look at the timing of this. I mean, you can't tell me that the two are not connected. I don't think anyone would be able to say that. And to allow for this to continue to happen, I think it's just...
The timing of what? Sorry.
The timing of the hostage release, the money being sent over, it's directly connected.
It's the same deal.
Yeah,
it's
part of the same deal. But it's incentive. That's exactly what it is that the Islamic Republic knows that
so
they
what's the incentive for the Islamic Republic to not jail a few more people and then ask for $6 billion?
That's exactly it. And I think it only leads to temporary concessions or temporary goodwill. It doesn't actually solve the problems long term. And we've seen it. I mean, history has shown us that that's the case, and yet we continue to negotiate with these terrorists. That's exactly what it is.
Did you see that Raisi also, he's done an interview with Fareed Zakaria?
Yes. I mean, I saw a portion of it.
I don't think it's aired yet.
Yeah.
I saw a portion too. I think it's going to be on that week. I like Fareed Zakaria.
I do
actually.
too.
Generally, I think he's very fair and very sharp guy. And
the answers, oh my god!
From what you can tell, it's like these guys again. It reminds me of the foreign minister,
master of deflection.
Well, they talk like, I mean, they really do talk like cartoon villains. Like, you can't believe the guys. Like, he goes, are these for humanitarian reasons? Are you going to spend the $6 billion on humanitarian? Everything we do is humanitarian.
With an evil laugh.
My friend. Yeah, exactly. He was not speaking English, but I mean, it's a very...
he said, what did he say? There was, he said it was going to be spent towards the needs of Iranians, were his exact words. And as soon as I heard that, I was like, what part of the needs of Iranians have you actually fulfilled in the last 40 some odd years for this to be, another? But I'm excited to see that interview, actually. I think the questions that he asks will be...
Yeah. You know how I generally feel about getting a platform to these guys, but
now that it's happening, at this point, I want to see the questions.
Yeah. And then while they're in New York, there's this thing just over the last 24 hours I've been seeing. Did you see there's Iran International? I mean, Iran International of all the networks tends to be, maybe they have the most resources, but they tend to be the more aggressive about trying to question these people. I mean, to their credit, I mean, they're on the scene and they're trying to. And there was one reporter. Did you see this whole?
I did the video.
It was impossible to look away. I mean, there was a regime thug or security guy or whatever he was. This is in New York, coming and trying to tell the Iran International guy.
Well, the Iran International journalist, is standing on the sidewalk outside of a hotel in New York City. I mean, if that's not public domain, I don't know what is.
He's not in Qom.
Exactly. So he's standing there, he's filming, as it's his right to, and one of these goons, as we call them, sees him filming, and he walks over all huff and puff and tries to push the camera out of his hand, and then an altercation starts. And the thing is that there's all these security guards or security service or whatever you want to call them, for kind of both sides, if you will, and they're just baffled because they don't know what to do, because this is so outrageous to think that you could
you can kind of see
like that.
Like the American, like the New York police or whatever, kind of going, what's happening here?
How do I intervene?
Yeah.
But that's not the only report of that happening, actually. I saw something else on Persian Twitter, my favorite source, or X now, whatever it's called.
Right. Is it X in Persian too?
I don't know.
I guess it must be, right?
Yeah, it must be. But there was a reporter, or a couple of reporters from VOA, who actually found the hotel that, I mean, like everyone else has found it, but they went to the hotel, they found the floor that a meeting was taking place.
Oh yeah, I saw this. It follows the guy into the elevator and stuff?
Into the elevator, and it's like, it's just...
But that wasn't that wasn't as confrontational.
No,
the guy just didn't say anything.
No. There's two incidents.
Oh.
So one is the following is after an altercation that took place. So there were 2 or 3 reporters, something like that. And again, an individual comes up and tries to take the camera this time, not only just hit it out of the person's hand, but again, the security.
I always find that it's so telling, right? It's like the entitlement. It's like, that they I mean, it's one thing to ignore the questions or pretend you're not, don't look at the guy or, give an evil smile and walk away or whatever it is, That's kind of what the most politicians from around the world would do.
Right.
But the idea that there's a guy we got to go rough up because he's asking questions with a microphone. I mean, it's so...
well, it's just disregard for the laws of the place that you're in.
But it suggests that we don't agree with those laws. We're not used to them. I mean,
it's not even that they don't agree. I think they just think of themselves as above it.
Yes.
That's what it is.
Or omnipotent.
Yeah.
How dare you? Yeah.
Exactly.
I mentioned this new hijab law. Is this passed now?
Yeah. So Parliament approved the new bill on September 20th. It was passed with some sort of ridiculous number, like 152 members.
September 20th was yesterday.
Yes, yesterday. Okay. Officially, it passed yesterday. 152 members of Parliament in favor, 34 against. So the wonderful 34 people who voted against it. I don't know who they are. And it's to be applied for a 2-year trial period. Now, this is still pending, of course, the Guardian Council's approval. So it passed in Parliament, but it has to go to the Iranian Guardian Council, which, of course, it'll be passed at. It's going to be put to a trial test period of 2 years. The bill calls for a maximum imprisonment of 10 years for anyone who defies the hijab laws. And I guess the fine print of that is that you have to have had more than 4 violations in order to be imprisoned for the 10 years. So there's some sort of
leeway,
I guess, count or leeway or something, if you will. But it also specifies that women who wear revealing or tight clothing or show a part of their body lower than the neck or higher than the ankles or higher than the forearms will face tougher punishments.
So one of the things that folks have been taking some heart with is that, the ground has shifted, the goalposts have moved, however you want to put it, that over the last year, especially, maybe a bit before that, but over the last year, we've seen all kinds of brave women in Iran, young women not wearing hijabs. We hear this constantly. We have friends that are there who say, I go out and I never wear the rusari. I don't cover myself. Is this really going to be a rollback, do you think, of all of that?
Well, I mean, we've already started to see it. I think, leading up to the anniversary of Mahsa's killing, or her murder, rather, we had seen that there was a crackdown. We had seen that, in numerous places like shopping malls, streets, all sorts of places where we had friends or we had seen videos of individuals not wearing the hijab, there was such a heavy presence of police or security forces or whatever you want to call it, that it wouldn't even allow for that to happen anymore. And so I definitely think that with the passing of this new bill, with the presence of security forces more and more, I do think it'll be a rollback for sure. Final
question was, I thought we'd be remiss if we don't mention Ronaldo. Back to football. If it's not Arsenal, it's so Cristiano Ronaldo, who plays now in the Arab League, of course, famously now landed in Iran this week for a couple of days of high-profile activity. What did you make of that?
I mean, I don't even know where to begin with that. In the grand scheme of things, with everything else that's happened in and around Iran and the Islamic Republic and Raisi and everything else we've just talked about, I think it's on the lowest level of my concerns. But I mean, anything that has to do with the Islamic Republic, there's nothing but bad news with it. I read something about there's an Iranian famous painter, I think she's an artist, who had drawn a portrait or a painting or something, and she somehow got a chance to meet with Ronaldo, and then he signed a jersey and gave it to her. And now her brother is saying that after leaving wherever this was, they've taken the jersey from her. I mean, there's nothing.
We don't know that.
I mean, I don't know, but this is what's reported. And then, of course, we saw the mass of people who were rushing the hotel, and
There were some people who were saying
them.
that the timing was conspicuous, that you're naive to think that this isn't planned to deflect from attention of the Mahsa Amini anniversary and Raisi in New York and the crackdowns and all of that. That's not entirely easy for me to believe, because there is these things, the leagues plan this, and this is well planned in advance. And the one thing I'll say is, listen, I adore the passion for football that Iranians and those young Iranian boys have, but those scenes, it just looked like a bunch of people running after a bus, and
the climbing the side of the mountain to get to the hotel.
I mean, it just looked so, I don't even know how to say it. It didn't look. It wasn't a good look.
No,
it wasn't a good look for this country of sophisticated, wonderful, people living in a modern. I don't know. I was like, where is this?
Yeah.
First of all,
I couldn't believe
and it was
that
Tehran.
Was yeah, that's the thing. I couldn't believe it. Seeing the images, I was like, this has got to be somewhere else.
And then they like ransacked the hotel, and part of it is, I don't want to only ever blame the government of Iran as much as we know how we feel, because there's soccer hooligans in England and you can't blame that all on the government of England or whatever. But there was seemingly no contingency for this. Like, you're clearly trading on the idea of this famous football star coming to Iran if you're the regime. So why not plan for it somehow? Allow an area where people can gather, or, not have to run after a bus and break down again, and there was no, by the way, when they played the game, there was nobody in the stands, right? And I'm presuming this is because the government doesn't want crowds to gather for any reason, right? So the whole thing is just badly managed. I mean, there's some great photo ops, and Ronaldo himself, I've never been a fan. I'm Team Messi over the Messi-Ronaldo, the ongoing debate. But I think this guy, I mean, he's just a football player at the end of the day who happens to be very handsome and extremely rich at this point and very talented. But I actually admire the way he handles himself in situations like this. Like, what a minefield for him to have to come into and smile and pat everybody on the head and say, thank you, Iranian people. When can I get out of here? I mean, it's, he seemed to handle himself elegantly, but yeah, it was a weird episode in the middle of everything else going on.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, the images, I can't get those images out of my head. The first thing I thought was, this can't be Iran. This can't be Tehran for sure. But
it was weird.
It was very strange.
Yeah.
I mean, the other thing is, we've seen mass demonstrations and people coming onto the streets, obviously, over the course of the last year, even inside Iran. And the crackdown, the security forces and things like that, I mean, if you can do that, you can't get your shit together to have some sort of something in place to have all these...
With all this, I mean, if Bukayo Saka comes to Toronto...
I don't know who that is.
He's a place for Arsenal. He's he's our star boy. If he comes to Toronto and there's a bus going down, I might run after the bus and try to mount the bus and break into the hotel and whatever.
If you ever see Jian running after a bus, just know.
The Arsenal bus. Thank you, Pegah. I'm excited to get Gisue Hariri on.
You.
So I think we've said enough. And we look forward to sharing some more positive news next week.
Yes, hopefully.
Because it isn't all negative. But thanks for all of that.
Thank you.
We are coming to you on roqemedia.com. It's there that you can link to all of our platforms: Spotify, SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, Instagram, CastBox. If you're a regular listener to what we do here, we love the idea of you sharing our content. That really helps us. So you send this show to somebody or post it or tell people about it, or that's kind of how we don't really market or have a marketing budget for Roqe or anything. It's always been word of mouth. We've done these 16 million streams just from people telling each other about it. So we'd love you to do that. Share what you are hearing on this program. It helps us. If you like to see visuals with Roqe, we've got our YouTube channel. If you like your descriptions in English and in Persian, check us out on Telegram. Ahai Roham, the savvy Roham, he translates things into Persian and posts them there. And if you directly want to support us by not just by subscribing and sharing our content, you can actually become a Roqe member on Patreon for a few bucks a month. We really appreciate that. You go over to our website, roqemedia.com, roqemedia.com, and press the support us button. It takes you to the Patreon page, and you can figure out how to support us for a few bucks a month, buy us a coffee each month, and it helps us stay alive. Thank you to you guys out there who are Roqe members and support what we do. All right. Let's get to our featured guest, why don't we? My featured guest today is a distinguished Iranian-American architect and one of the co-founders of the renowned New York-based architecture firm Hariri and Hariri. Gisue Hariri was born and raised in a small city in Khuzestan. She, along with her sister Mojgan, relocated to the USA to further their education and then established their architecture firm in 1986. Renowned for their innovative and avant-garde designs, they've left a significant mark on the world of architecture and design and have been involved in various high-profile projects around the world, including residential homes, art galleries, commercial spaces, for which they have won numerous awards. And their work has been exhibited at the MoMA in New York, the National Building Museum, and the Barcelona Museum of Contemporary Art, among other institutions. And right now, Gisue Hariri joins me from New York City today. Hello.
Hello, Jian. So good to see you and meet you on Zoom, virtually. And thank you for inviting me to be part of your program.
It's a great honor and pleasure to have you. You're not easy to get. You know, you're in a lot of demand, which I understand with your buildings around the world and your profile. So we're honored to have you on the program finally. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let me start with the basics because I know that you're quite well known in the Iranian community around the world. But for those who don't necessarily know you, and perhaps some non-Iranians listening as well, your success and your story seems to be a study in contrasts and juxtapositions. And let me start with where you started. You're a kid from Khuzestan. I think I've told you my dad is from Khuzestan, and so I still have a lot of family there. It's close to my heart. You and your sister literally grew up in the desert in the southwest of Iran. This provokes an immediate and fascinating juxtaposition. How do girls growing up in the desert in Iran imagine being architects, let alone pioneers as modern designers that have now become world renowned? One would, on the face of it, assume you were a couple of well-to-do kids from Tehran who had famous architect parents or something. That was not the case. Explore that juxtaposition, please.
Well, this is the journey of my life. And as you mentioned, I grew up in the desert, and we lived in southern parts of Iran due to the fact that my father was an engineer in the Iranian oil company, and we had to basically be near the oil fields. So it was a fascinating, I think, and very unusual upbringing. As you know, that part of the world is very hot and dry and pretty much covered by the desert. So it was fascinating because this environment, this desert, actually was isolating at the same time nurturing. The isolation, I think, provided an environment for us, for me and my sister, who are a year and a half apart, and we're growing up together, in a way to develop our imagination. We have to create our own games, our own toys, our own imaginary friends, and really our own world. There were no major towns around us, as you know, you're familiar with the area. At the time that I was growing up, even in like Ahvaz or Abadan, or more, kind of urban towns and cities, they really, I think, were no art galleries, no museums, no cultural centers that I knew of where, like, perhaps my parents could take us,
right,
to become familiar with that kind of art and culture. And so it was a very unusual, I think, upbringing for an Iranian woman to begin with, or girls. Our friends, were not other necessarily children or playmates that were women, but were lizards and, grasshoppers and garden snakes. And so we were absorbed by nature because we wanted to find friends and find out what kind of species live in this area because of its nature. And so I think that gives you a curiosity about the world, about life in general. And as children, we were exploring it, and it was becoming part of us without us knowing it. So in that sense, I think there was a lot of learning and imagination that we did together.
I love the imagination part and the curiosity that comes from, for lack of a better term, the blank canvas, if you would say artistically, of the desert. But the counterintuitive part, I mean, that might explain why you would be inventive or industrious or curious about nature. But the counterintuitive part is, on some level, it feels like your story or even what you're saying suggests that where you've come to, the journey of being these world-renowned architects, these designers, that rather than growing up in Hong Kong or Berlin or New York, surrounded by designs and buildings and skyscrapers, etc., that somehow it was an advantage to be in the desert in the southwest of Iran. How do we make sense of that?
I mean, I think it's absolutely true. If we had grown in an environment that perhaps our imagination or pure instinct would be diluted by all the noise and all the other things that were around us, perhaps we wouldn't be here, because environment became a major, I think, part of our architecture. We started the whole kind of approach to sustainability and respect for nature in our work because of where we come from, because we understood how the climate and environment impacts your life, your living, and what it requires to survive. It almost becomes survival architecture, if you will. And for that reason, I truly believe where we grew up in the desert did become part of later on what we developed into architecture. And for us, it was fascinating to see how all of a sudden our professors and our colleagues were talking about sustainability and environment while it was within us all the time. Like, we knew you need cross ventilation. We knew that you need to respect nature because of just even being Iranian. Iranians have, the Zoroastrians in a way worshipped the elements of nature. Water was sacred, so always, it was protected. You would go down and create these, underground water storages that then you would use for cooling. I mean, all of us grew up in some traditional homes, or our grandparents had lived in them, where you would go in a basement level and you didn't need air conditioning. It was already cool because of the use of ventilation and use of water. And again, the wind is now well known how in Yazd and some parts of Iran, they call them wind catchers, created architecture that went and scooped and collected the wind and brought it into architecture. So, I mean, this is how we grew up. So for me, it was very strange. And, then, fire, the element of fire and warmth, and using fire to make clay brick. That's how we constructed our architecture, with brick, with the earth of the place we came from. It never came from somewhere else.
Can I just say as a sidebar that it's so gratifying or interesting to hear someone talk about, we what you were describing as the cooling system, for example, even the yakhjal. I mean, these are things that were invented in Iran hundreds and hundreds of, in
3,000,
some cases
5,000
thousands of years,
ago, yeah.
right? And sometimes there's a bit. I mean, people who listen to this program would know that I've gone on about this. Sometimes I feel like it's almost intellectually or somehow dishonest for us to, we go, we're great because 2,000 years ago something was invented, and I think, well, what's the relationship between who we are as Iranians today and something that happened 2,000 years ago? And yet, this is such an interesting moment. You're talking about the through line that this woman and her sister, who are now in New York designing things around the world, you're connecting that back to Iranian history of 2,000 years ago in such a beautiful way. And that's the answer. That's the answer to the relevance of our history, right?
That's very, very true. And I truly believe we are at the moment in the world where in our humanity, because of the disasters we have with climate change, with all the, disastrous hurricanes and problems that we human beings have caused for ourselves and for our planet, that we need to revisit these ancient cultures and relearn from them. See, I think the issues are ancient, and we will rediscover that the disasters that we are facing today needs to be answered by perhaps not looking so much into the future and going to the moon and relying so much on technology. Technology should be used in an answer that we have already found in the ancient cultures.
It's fascinating.
And that's why, for me, that is very, very special.
I want to come back to the sustainability because it's a big part of what you guys have done, especially in recent years. But just take me back still to the two girls in the desert in Khuzestan. What was there a light bulb moment? I mean, I know that at summers you would visit your grandparents in Esfahan, which of course is known for its design splendor, world renowned. But was that the point? I mean, where's the point where you look at Mujgan and you guys go, we should start designing these things, or we could, this is something we could do, as opposed to any other job or profession, especially as girls who, don't have a lot of, wouldn't at that time have a lot of role models to follow in the footsteps of.
That's right. Well, to be honest, there was no light bulb moment. It was incremental, and I always still say the way I practice architecture, we practice architecture is a dialogue and this play that we created from our childhood, and it's continuing now. We are constantly in talk of how can we make things better, how can we create things that are more interesting, what are the problems that we are facing that need to be addressed and no one else is addressing, for example, like homelessness. So as we are growing up and as we are evolving, we are also, seeing or confronting other issues and I would say problems that we need to face. And just like before, we sit down and start talking about it and discussing it, and wouldn't that be nice if we come up with some idea or a project and try to resolve that? But also, I think what is interesting to me is growing up in the desert also was inspiring artistically. As you mentioned, it is like a blank canvas. To grow up in a place that is so pure, so infinite, so it's like almost living in poetry. And that aspect of it has affected our architecture. I mean, I didn't come here and say, no, I want to be, I want to bring the desert to the United States. I came here because, or to answer your question, I became interested to study architecture because Iran was developing rapidly at our time.
The 70s.
I was in the high school.
Right.
And so the discussions always around, as they would say, the kitchen table was, what does the country need? Engineers, architects, there were all kinds of programs to build all this stuff.
Right.
And so it goes into your head and you're like, oh, okay, I want to come and help my country and rebuild my country or contribute to the development. And so I, obviously being the older sister, told my parents, I think I want to be an architect. And my father said, what do you know about architecture? And then with a little pause, how about interior design? I said, I don't want to design the interior. I want to build the town. And he said, well, let's start first with one building, and then we go into developing towns. And so having families and parents that are also supportive of your idea, especially, again, your girl or a woman in Iran, definitely helps. And that support did come from my family. That's, they thought, sure, why not? You can do anything you want to do.
What's the magic with your sister? I mean, you are famously such a team. You're not twins. I mean, we hear about these twins but I mean, a lot of people love our families. I love my sister, but I don't, certainly in my sister and I's case, I couldn't imagine us inseparably being together and building a business together without getting into fights or something like that. But siblings can be mean to each other. What is the magic of you two and how you've had this journey together that seems so sustaining?
Yes, as you noted, we are not twins. I am a year and a half older than her, but ever since that I understood who I was and my existence, I've always had this sister next to me and with me. And so we've shared, everything together. And we are, as you mentioned, sometimes extremely mean to one another. But at the same time, we realized very early on that each one of us is definitely very skilled and extremely good in designing architecture for the projects we want to do. But together, we equal not 2, but equal 100. I mean, our powers together is truly magical. And I think the reason for it is that we trust one another. We know that if we push each other and push our boundaries, in terms of stamina, in terms of design, in terms of skills, is not a criticism of one being less than the other, but it's because together we want to really, really have an impact in this world.
Do you each have roles? I mean, is it like one person writes the lyrics and the other the music? I mean, do you or do you know what you're each bringing to each project?
Well, we definitely have our weaknesses and our strengths, and we try to maximize the strengths that we have, and help each other in the areas that we each need a bit more development. But no, we don't have a specific role, except now that obviously the projects are larger. We cannot both do exactly the same thing all the time. So Mojgan by nature is much more focused on details and execution of projects. It truly bothers her if there is one corner of a $1 million project is that no one sees is not perfect. So,
and it doesn't bother you?
It doesn't bother me because I think life is not perfect. And I have learned to, in fact, enjoy the imperfectness of life and learn from it. And next time around, do not allow it to happen. But it bothers her a lot, so we allow her to worry about them. And for that reason, I think we have a very, very good team. But, design and the concept of the project, we definitely work together for it to happen.
One of the things I try to remind myself to do with this program is to not minimize the emotional experience of immigration. It's actually a really big deal to move from one part of the world to an entirely different part of the world. And I think it explains a lot of the dysfunction of the Iranian community around the world, as most of us have done this migration within the last 40 years, post 1979, some slightly before that. But it's also a bigger deal to immigrate from one place, from Iran to some other place in the world, in an era before social media and Facebook and Twitter and getting online and seeing your friends back home as soon as you get to a new country. So you arrive in America in the 1970s. Two Iranian girls studying at Cornell. I can't imagine there were a lot of other female students in architecture. In fact, you've said that there were no female professors in your field at the time at Cornell.
Right.
Tell me about being Iranian women and new to America in the 70s at Cornell and that experience for you.
Well, it was very exciting and also challenging, as you mentioned, to be a woman in an architecture program, let alone at one of the best. The Cornell undergraduate program was very well known. In fact, very difficult to even get in. But our passion for architecture, and we came one after another. So I arrived and started to learn my way around. And I never thought I was going to be afraid, because there was a purpose. There was this idea that we would learn everything that the best university in the world has to offer, to take it back again with us to Iran, to rebuild our country. But, the disappointment was that in high school, and actually in elementary school, we went to schools that were single-sex schools. They were all for girls, and we were always surrounded by women and other children that were the same gender. And so my hope was that in this new world, you actually would experience more of an equality and more of a intermix of the genders. And so the disappointment for me was to arrive at a school that were token number of girls, and not only that, to see that the boys, I call them, my colleagues, my other students of architecture, in fact, didn't have any interest to even intermingle with you, to bring you in, to accept you. And so I first thought that was just the schools of architecture and the era that I was in. But, later on in life, I realized this is going to be permanent in our professional life. The world of architecture has always been, for hundreds of years, the world of men. In construction, they're all run, or not these days. Now we have other women who are developers and contractors and builders, but again, very few. So when you are in this kind of environment, you feel that you really need extra protection and you need extra help. And so for me, that has been one of the few disappointments of not finding that equal weight in this country, which was something I was seeking for, because in our country, this segregation and this kind of, as they call, gender apartheid was so pronounced. And I was, as a teenager, growing within that kind of culture.
I was going to ask you about this later, but I mean, since we're at it right now, I mean, one would expect or hope that things have dramatically changed now. Do you still feel like there are instances, even now, with all of your success and fame, where you are underestimated, where you and your sister are not given the same sort of expectation of being the best at what you do that a man would?
Well, things definitely have improved, because now, as you know it and the world knows it, more than 80%, more than 50-60% of each university, architecture student is occupied by women. We definitely have all the major architecture schools have deans that are women. So there is much more attention and understanding that perhaps the needs and the way we educate architects should at least have different voices that could be taught and learned from. So in that sense, it's definitely a very large, I would say, change. But, after 40 years of how you practice, and as you mentioned, kind of slowly but step by step, getting awards, in participating, let's say, in discussions, in teaching, in actually, having 4 or 5 books of architecture out that is a collection of our work, our
Yes.
ideas, our thoughts. You would imagine by now, you would be on the list of the high,
Yes.
Nobel Prizes and recognitions that the world architects, in a way, should get. And I don't think that will happen, because if you look at the Pritzker Prize, which is the Nobel Prize for architecture, perhaps there are 2 or 3 very recently women have won that prize. I was talking to a very trusted and important architect who was the director of MoMA at one point in time. And, he said to me, you have to realize those kinds of awards and those kinds of architecture projects, the museums, the main projects that the world begins to see and experience are all political. They don't come to you because you are a very good architect. There are many good architects around. And so I think that was an eye-opening moment for me. If it's all about politics, honestly, perhaps it's okay for us not to win those kinds of projects. But is we still do not have enough substantial public projects that are excellent and are done by women architects.
Yeah, I recall interviewing, it's got to be probably 18, 20 years ago now, Daniel Liebskin, and we titled the interview, we were talking about the new era of starchitects, how architects were the new rock stars. But all of the examples were men at the time, and which clearly is not the available pool. There should be a lot of female stars in there too. So obviously what you say makes sense and we need to keep developing in this era, in this area. I think back to when you first established your company then in the mid 80s, you and your sister. It must have been on some level kind of audacious, these 2 Iranian women starting an architecture firm in New York City, and here we go. Tell me about that. Did it feel like a bold move, or was it just natural for you two?
It was definitely very natural for us. And I tell you the story. We realized within a year or 2 of the school that our colleagues always, along, I think, the projects that we were doing academically and for the school, they would gather together, a group of them, the celebrated, colleagues, I call them, and had this kind of a boys' club where, the selected few would get to come together and participate in, I would say, architectural competitions. And the idea was that hopefully they will win one of these, competitions for a very large project. And then, they were already famous and they would already have their project even while they were in school. And so we always kind of, we were never invited. We were never part of it. And so we got fed up with it. And I told my sister, well, we can have our own club. We can do our own competitions.
Nice.
So we started doing also competitions together. We had few colleagues who came and helped because, it required double amount of work nighttime doing competitions and daytime, going to classes. And honestly, the few projects that we did together with some of our friends turned out to be really good. So from that time, we knew that we are going to have our own office. We knew that together we work really well. I mean, they were like 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning, where, we are working together and complaining and, all of that, or telling stories. I'm falling asleep. And my sister would come and say, don't fall asleep. One day, this is going to be our story. So I would wake up, go make coffee. Then she would say, well, I think this is good enough. And I would say, no, because one day this is going to win and be one of those architects who were winners as students in their school. So we kept each other company and encouraged. And always the goal was to create this project that was so far and beyond and great that, others will recognize that, our passion for architecture was not just even for the price, but for the project.
I didn't want to. I left the conversation of you being at Cornell before asking you about something, which is that you said you seem to be implying that the expectation at the time you guys went to Cornell in the 70s was that you were going to return to Iran. You obviously end up at some point deciding to stay in the U.S. as you've now been New York based for many years. Was that the Islamic Revolution of '79? I mean, what happened that you decide to stay in America?
Yes, I was actually doing my thesis at the time, and then there was a revolution. And so on one hand, we had the radio at that time. There wasn't all this social media broadcasting and
Right.
computers. And I was inking my thesis drawings, and it was becoming obvious. And finally, there is a revolution. So the thing is, we were already here in school, and so honestly, it was very, very difficult time and scary time, I would say, because we did have United States government sent to see whose visas are finishing, like what is going on with this Iranian students. And so we were told that the visas that are finishing and our students who are completing our projects is not going to be renewed because of the Islamic Revolution. And so the decision was which route to go, whether to even try to continue our education, which was, at the time, because there was restrictions of sending funds and money, and how do you live when your parents are all over the place. And so it was not so easy. It wasn't like all of a sudden there was a hurricane that came and demolished everything. And most importantly, your purpose of studying architecture to go and help rebuild your country.
Yeah.
No one stopped us from going back, and we still would like to one day go back. But what happened is we were allowed to have, I think, a year or 2 years of internship and work visa. And that's what we decided to do and apply for, and therefore started working for American architectural companies. And so that was learning now to become professional and how offices run and so on. Gave us a little buffer zone to look and see and analyze what has become of our country and whether it would be appropriate for us now to go back or not. The country is in a very transitional zone, and perhaps it would be wise to stay longer in where we are and complete and become a little bit more fluent in all the technologies that were now rapidly, no one was drawing with hand anymore, with computers and the newer technologies. And so that was the reason that I have told my children, my two daughters, that I don't feel or believe in my soul that I ever migrated or immigrated to United States. I was already here, and I was, in a way, paying dues. I was paying taxes. I was working, for different offices. And then I decided that, I welcome this extension of stay, and I always feel I'm a guest here. I'm a guest of United States. They have been fantastic hosts. They have protected us. They have given us opportunities to create many things and to make a home here. But, I'm ready.
It's interesting because at that time, you're in a catch-22 because obviously there's the challenges of going back to Iran, which is now in, as you called it, the transition. The transition it's 44 years. We're still in the transition, apparently. But this with this Islamic government and regime. But so there's the difficulty of going back, but staying involves some difficulty too, because in the early 1980s, it wasn't necessarily easy to be Iranian in America, especially after the hostage crisis. Did you face discrimination in those times? Was it particularly difficult in terms of being Iranian, or were you somehow, kept from that being in a big city like New York?
I think being in New York City helped because there are so many truly different cultures that coexist with one another. So you didn't feel like, it wasn't in Midwest or it wasn't in southern part of the United States where perhaps being a foreigner is much more pronounced. Here, everyone is from somewhere. And for that reason, I think it shows New York. It's a small island that we live in. It's almost like a bubble in the United States of creative people and a center of art and commerce and Wall Street and so on. So in that sense, no, I would say we didn't feel discrimination, but I would say it was very, very difficult time after the hostage taking, because it wasn't just there was a revolution, then there was also this backlash that if you are Iranian, you are a terrorist.
Yeah.
Most people teeter-totter in saying they are Iranians and who they are. But I never shied away. And as I am saying even today, after 44 years here, I love where I am. I love Americans and I love my clients and people who have trusted us and have worked with us and have given us an opportunity. But I'm not an American. I am definitely an Iranian in soul and in DNA, and I'm very proud of it.
Isn't that interesting? Because you've now lived more of your life outside of Iran than inside Iran.
Yes. I think where you're born and where you develop and your childhood is the foundation of who you become later on. So to kind of cut that and put it aside and become or, mix with something else was very difficult for me and has never happened.
Gisue, a few moments ago, you talked about the political nature of those that get awards in the field of architecture, and I know that there's politics involved in terms of who even gets the gigs, who gets awarded the projects. Sometimes, obviously, be naive to think otherwise. But you've said that all architecture is political, which is quite a provocative statement. What does it mean?
Well, architecture. What is architecture? Architecture it's a contract between architects and people of a place. In a way, have a relationship with their authorities and with people who make change in their environment and in their living. So they are the decision makers. And therefore, architecture by nature becomes political. It's not who I decide how people have to live. People have to, in a way decide, or the government puts the regulations in place of what is to become of architecture. And as architects, even here on a daily basis, we are confronting authorities who are set in their position and frame of mind with codes, with regulations, while you see how fast our technologies are going forward. You cannot keep the same thoughts and ideas and vision about cities without understanding that we need to make change. So in that sense, there is always, I don't want to say a conflict, but there is always this dialogue and confrontation that, happens. And architects are responsible to people because we build their environments. And so in that sense, talking before, we were saying that there's a social responsibility. We are responsible of how safe our structures are, how those structures that are safe make the environment we live in safe. It's a very...
That's such an interesting explanation because, again, on the face of it, I would think, okay, a building is it's like a thing. It's an inert. It's a material structure. It's like a table. How could it be political? But but you're so obviously you're so right in the sense that how you build a building, where you build a building, what's the nature of the building, all of that is necessarily interacting with the community around it, and therefore political. Now, when you mention social responsibility, this is very interesting to me because I've seen you talk about this, and I know you talk about sustainability, etc. And when I started the interview saying the juxtapositions, I wanted to get to this as well because the nature of at least some of what you do seems to be for a very select global elite. I mean, you build these fantastic, amazing, incredible buildings that obviously work with, in some ways preserve, I suppose, the top 1%. But I also know that your heart is in wanting to give back and pay forward and sustainability, et cetera. So tell me about dealing with trying to make what you do and those for whom you do it accessible or in line with your democratic tendencies.
Architecture has this juxtaposition or this contrasting sides to it. On one hand, you are, as an architect, educated to accept the responsibility towards a community, towards different cultures, towards the world at large. But at the other hand, architecture has become and has always been commerce. So it's about construction and sale and I mean, how many times have we seen a luxury building and luxury condominiums being built, which is for that, unfortunately, 1%. So we know this and we have realized this. I have always tried in my office to have a balance between the two. There is no reason not to create a great work of architecture for someone who has the passion to create art, to give away something because they can fund that kind of a project. So they are part of the elite, wealthy 1%. But on the other hand, I think one needs to give the same amount of beauty and passion and creativity to those who don't have the funds and who need it the most, because they are the souls and spirits that need to be elevated, not the ones that have everything and have seen everything. So we have always tried to have a balance in that sense, that we, within our own office, while we have active projects under construction, also do research, also do theoretical projects, also do, question, like how can we help, and then come up with an answer. So that has been an ongoing, in a way, attitude or philosophy. And for us,
do they butt heads, the imperative for commerce versus the imperative to do something socially responsible? Are they at odds with each other all the time?
I would say they are not at odds with each other at all. It's just no one wants to do it. It takes time, it takes money, it takes resources, and why would you want to do that? The governments are not interested. I mean, look at the state of housing around the world. We have 150 million people who have either migrated because of wars, have lost their homes because of climate change, or simply because of this wealth inequality around the world are homeless.
But why are the governments not interested? Isn't it? I mean, why are the business? Because it costs money, right?
Because it costs money.
Well, so it is commerce versus social responsibility.
It's a commerce in a sense that the government, I think, should have a responsibility. If not the government, the architects. If not the architects, the entrepreneurs. Somebody has to step in and say, we are in to give our time and our, life to
So
to solve this problem.
when you're in the moment of creation, if you will, I can imagine if you want to carry this social responsibility, and back to the conversation about architecture being political, these questions are going to come up. You're going to say, hey, let's make this part affordable or sustainable or make it with something environmentally friendly, and somebody who's funding the project is going to say no, and you're going to be butting heads. Is that basically the story of your life at this point?
Most of the time, yes, because initially it may cost more. So that's what I'm trying to say. The regulations and the forms of practice are as such that everyone is set the way. If you want to create change, if you want to solve a problem of 150 million people, you cannot think the same way that we've been thinking architecture for 5,000 years. You cannot build with mortar and bricks. You cannot fund it only either privately or with the help of government. You need to bring people together to look at the way we are trying to go against climate change is not only with one way. To have electric cars is going to have a big impact. Now, who would think that someone is going to come like Elon Musk and say, we're going to have, I'm going to make electric cars, and these electric cars are going to put all these, gas stations out of business, but we're going to have like batteries that are going to be rechargeable. We're going to make new stations all over the world. These are very big, I think, imaginary but doable thinking that we need to be doing. I want to do that with architecture.
And you are doing that. In terms of setting an example, I was trying to think of, there's a few things you've done around the world. So you tell me if this is a good example, but I was going to ask you about the Garden of Hope in Afghanistan. Maybe you can tell us about that in terms of reimagining what we can do with architecture, right?
Right. Yes, Garden of Hope was, unfortunately, this was just right before Taliban took place, talking about politics changing everything. And there was a competition that potentially a government or a donor would give a very large and substantial piece of land for development to house women who have lost their husbands and therefore are breadwinners and often are attacked by other men and have nothing to eat, and their children have to go and beg on the streets. And so it was a very important project to me. But the reason we took over or this competition and wanted to participate mainly was because for the past 5 years, being tired of, again, complaining to everyone and myself about homelessness and the number of people, perhaps, I don't know how it is like in Toronto, but in New York, we have them everywhere. Yeah. And the situation has gotten worse with COVID and people losing jobs and people living on the streets. And you have seen Los Angeles photographs of San Francisco. The government is putting money in, but I think they don't have the clear idea of what would be the best way to go about it so they don't create other ghettos like how we had them before. It's not just kind of creating homes or a condominium or a hotel. These things need other amenities, other services that you need to provide. And so I was thinking that perhaps one can create a home that this home is foldable. So it becomes flat. And therefore you can move the home to different places in the world that is needed. And you will not need a reconstruction and heavy duty workforce to put that up. But again, my dream is with the push of a button, this home would open and then you can go in it and make a home out of it. There have been a lot of attempts around the world to have machines that come in, these 3D machines that make homes. And these 3D machines are very time consuming to build anything. It's not tested that what the material they use for construction, how strong and how safe it is, because we haven't had one to go through a hurricane or go through an earthquake to see, how they perform. And they're very, very costly, $200,000 per simple unit that the machine, has to take 2 weeks to build. This to me is not a solution, is one of the solutions that perhaps one could use as part of technology that is developing. And, the other, things that we have seen is like, government paying $150,000 to $250,000 per apartment for another apartment building to go up, which is not necessarily of great quality, and perhaps no one wants to live in there. I don't know what it is. And that's out of the question, because that kind of money is not available everywhere. And so, this project that I have invented, and now we have a patent on it, and we are almost done with our prototype, is called Folding Pod. I have a partnership with engineers and others who are trying to put this into manufacturing. If we can manufacture this pod, every family can have a home that is solid, that is beautiful, that has integrity, and it is going to cost somewhere between $7,500 to $10,000, which would be nothing for most governments or charities and people who can help out. But for the 5 years, I have applied to every foundation, every person that I thought maybe technologically would be interested, maybe they would help. No one has helped. So this is all purely, from our sense of duty and sense of social responsibility.
Good for you.
Use our own energy and, in a way, time.
They're really cool looking, the folding pods. I mean, as an 80s kid, it's my movie version of the future. It's like Blade Runner or something, seeing these folding houses that you're building. When just to get around some of the lexicon, understand what you mean. I think I know what sustainability means. What does a holistic approach to architecture, what does that mean?
Holistic to us means, and maybe I can give an example, actually. It's like when you go to doctors with holistic approach, they don't only look at one part or a symptom of your problem,
right,
but they look at, in a way, they call it holistic medicine.
Right.
May coming from your mind, it may be coming from your body. So it's a body and mind coming together. So for us, architecture, you cannot just focus on a building or a part of a building or technology of a building, but they're all part of the same. It's about the environment. It's about people and environment coming together. So it's a multiple of different, aspects of life that comes together. And again, going back to my Iranianness, it's how life, innovative and in a way artistic life perhaps, was lived in the old times in Iran. Omar Khayyam wrote poetry. He was a scientist. He was an astrologer. I mean, you don't need to know only one thing. You need to have a holistic idea about life and the world before you can, in a way, make parts of it, because they're all interrelated. And so for us, holisticness is this interrelatedness of parts of people, architecture, and environment.
That's first of all, I love that. I love a holistic approach to life, and Omar Khayyam as an example. But also, I'm glad you came back to the Iranianness, because that's where I want to end off. I'm so enjoying this conversation, but I know I can't keep you forever. First of all, a little bit of a sidebar, if you will, about Iranianness. It occurs to me on some level, you and your sister are perfect role models for Iranians because you're successful, you're well-spoken, you're khud but you also deal in luxury. And, maybe it's because I didn't grow up in Iran. I don't know. I grew up in England and in Canada. And it's not that I don't appreciate a nice skyline like we have in Toronto, but this obsession with the Dubai-esque luxury that Iranians have, where does that come from, do you think?
Honestly, I think there are these Western ideas of what is good in life. I have asked myself, what is luxury? And, my description of luxury is very different from a lot of other people. Luxury is, unfortunately to me, or fortunately, not about glitz and not about having it all. Luxury definitely is about poetry. And if I could create architecture in a sense that is three-dimensional poetry in space, to me that is luxury, because that kind of work impacts, again, holistically your soul, your spirit, your body, and your humanity. To me, being a human being is the luxury of life. And I want to go back actually to Rumi, who I always go back and read it because it brings us to luxury and also to perhaps this idea of everything being part of everything else in the world. Rumi says you are not a drop in the ocean. You are the entire ocean in one drop. It cannot get more luxurious than this, to feel that you are the ocean. And so I am hoping by mentoring, by talking, by, being on social media, to help everyone, to help the world, and to help my fellow Iranians and fellow Iranian women to understand that, to understand their own value and how they are everything and they have everything. They need to understand that to feel complete and feel important.
The Al Vand office tower that you designed stands in Tehran. Right. It's breathtaking. I haven't seen it in person, just the photos, but I'm mesmerized by it. It's been called the Jewel of Tehran. You posted a photo of it in February on Instagram and wrote, "To women, life, freedom." Tell me about that dedication of this particular building in Tehran.
I am so proud and encouraged and feel more accomplished as an Iranian woman than as an architect when I see the fight that younger Iranian women have on the streets on a daily basis, just because they want their rights and just because they want to have freedom to choose. This is not about politics. This is not about the government. It's about being a human being. And so that has been, going back to the start, more of a journey of me and my sister as women to start, as young girls who want to, in a way, show the world that the inequality exists and we need to get rid of it because everybody deserves to be treated the same. Because of that, I have been very much, pro Zan Zindagi Azadi, woman life freedom movement. And I have no doubt that they will succeed because I'm telling you, leave it to Iranian women. they're gonna make it to the finals. And I say that by experience. So I wish them well, and I want them to know that we in the West are doing everything we can to be behind them and to encourage them not to lose hope.
It's really wonderful getting to talk to you. It's actually very inspirational, and you're a philosopher, aren't you? I mean, you approach things philosophically. You're like Khayyam. You're the architect and the poet and the philosopher, and but I that's been the greatest takeaway for me from this conversation, that you don't sound or seem to approach things like all the engineers and scientists and architects I know, but that you seem to really come at things philosophically.
This was the best compliment I have ever heard. I don't come as close to even a fingertip of Khayyam, but he has influenced us, and we still read his poems. And I remember in Iran how, you would open Khayyam's book before you even leave your home to see what the day had for you in mind. And I think we have engineering is much more about solving problems in a sequence. Philosophy allows you to have a larger view of where you want to go with these little things that you solve in between. And so, yes, I do have definitely a view about where I want to go and what I want to achieve and why. And I always tell architects, especially architects in Iran, you have to have something that you want to say to the world. If you don't have it, then it becomes very difficult for you to, in a way, convey who you are. And so, yes, philosophy is important, and you better start working on it.
Thank you for this. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jian. This is so wonderful. Thank you for having me. I know you've worked very hard to compile a whole lot of very interesting interviews with people that I admire, actually, and follow myself. So to be among them is really, truly an honor.
It's a great honor for us. I hope to do this again and continue this conversation. It definitely wasn't enough. There's more. Hopefully we do it in person next time. Merci. Khudafis. There she is, the architect star, Gisue Hariri. And thank you again, Gisue, joining from New York. This is Full Time for Roqe for today. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for being part of this. Remember, for all things Roqe related, go to our website, roqemedia.com. roqemedia.com. It is there that you can find all of our back catalog, every single one of our 287 shows, the contemporary history of Iran, our Roqe funnies, our videos. It's all there. roqemedia.com. Thanks to the amazing team who put this show together. Super Parisa, bearded Omid, savvy Roham, smart Pegah, talented Anahita, methodical Kabe, and sound person Louise. Thank you to all of you out there for supporting us and sharing our content. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already. You can find me on Instagram at Jian Ghomeshi. Mizun Bashi.